Hey guys, big hello to all. In this video I want to tell you about the top 5 DIY rigs for catching crucian carp. These will be Karma rigs, long distance rigs, carp killer and flat rigs. There will be a Cork. I'll tell you about their advantages, what the disadvantages are. I've been fishing with Karma rigs for many years, catching crucian carp and carp, so I can tell you which rig is better and which is worse based on my experience. Personally for me and in my region, based on my water bodies. Right now I am at the pond and I decided to make a video for you because you asked me, Seryoga, when is fishing on Carmack, when is fishing on the flat? And you also asked what the difference is. Right now I want to tell you about it. I want to mention right away that all the setups that will be used in this video are quite budget friendly and anyone can make them themselves. And the first rig is the one that all of you love, the carp killer. Here it is in the store-bought version. This is what it looks like. So here at the end of the weight there are 3 feeders with big beads in between and dropper lines. The dropper hooks are made on these kinds of wires. Well, you could say they have anti-tangle features. Next comes a rather massive harsh hook and good braided thread that holds it. This is the gear, this is what it looks like. It seems like there's nothing here to get tangled up. Everything is done quite neatly, but now I will tell you about its disadvantages. This gear has many disadvantages, but it works well in paid ponds where there are a lot of fish and they take almost any floating bait. Now I'll tell you about her. The positive characteristics. The advantage is that there are 3 feeders and they are located at a fairly long distance from each other, and you can attach them here. Bait them with porridge and attach 3 different baits. Well, I guess that's where the advantages end. What they say is that they don't get tangled, but guys, they definitely do. You see, there are hooks that twist, and this is not the best rig. It came to us from China, and for some reason our fishermen are using this Chinese rig. Everyone rushed in and started fishing. But I want to say that it has a lot of disadvantages. The first disadvantage, it's very coarse. That is, these metal branches. Leashes that are made in such a way that it does not get tangled, they give the tackle a great deal of coarseness. When the fish are careful, if it is a free reservoir and not some kind of paid one, then they will not bite much. This tackle is good for fishing if you attach floating baits here. That is either some kind of popcorn boilie floating, something like that. Then it catches well. If you attach a hook corn or something else here, then the fish will already be afraid. This rig, if you're going to set it up, you need to modify it. All these rough hooks, leashes, are attached to monofilament. Beads are made completely differently so that the fish is not afraid when it approaches. So this rig, well, in my ranking I would say it's in last place because, to be honest, it's not very effective. Yeah, I can't argue with that. There are bodies of water where the killer rig for crucian carp works really well. A lot of people fish with it quite successfully. But again, I repeat, it varies in different regions. In my case, that's how it is. Because of these coarse hooks, it doesn't catch very well. As I told you, you need to redo everything with a fine, cautious monofilament line and use smaller hooks. And then the effect will be completely different. The next rig is the Cork rig. It can be homemade or store-bought, and it's made based on a principle, a method feeder. This rig is better for catching carp rather than crucian carp. If it's crucian carp, then only big ones. This rig is based on the principle of a pacifier, so it's like a pacifier, a cork. A method feeder, pretty much the same thing. What's the point? The porridge is stuffed here, many hooks are stuck in, there are 3, 4 or 5 hooks, and it seems to hook itself. It always falls with the weight down, so the mesh ends up on top. Yeah, this rig is quite effective, but it's definitely not a sport rig. And on it, you can see the bite, but you can also see when the fish has hooked itself. So this rig works quite well. You can fish effectively, guys. I recommend it to you. You can make it yourself or you can buy a ready-made one. But again, I want to say again that if you buy ready-made so that it doesn't turn out like with the Karas killer, all the elements need to be redone so that there is no rough thread, rough rope or big huge hooks. And everything needs to be done neatly and carefully. The cork rig or method feeder is made like this. This is a cork from a large bottle, a 5-liter one with a weight underneath, and it always falls off. This, you pack the mesh tightly in here and there are dropper hooks tied to it Here they are. You insert the bait into these hooks, like a floating bait, anything really, and it's mounted on top of the mash. The rig is quite effective. It's a rig like a method feeder. The next rig for catching crucian carp, from the throw rigs, this is a Karma rig. Many rigs, setups, and springs are referred to as Karma rigs. Springs can be very different. There are heavy ones with weights. Without weights, I still recommend that you use springs or a small load because the main weight is porridge and the spring must definitely be sliding. I'll show you in detail what a Karma rig looks like. I didn't modify it on purpose. This pocket is already more than 5 years old. I have it on this rod. I don't fish with them anymore. I'm already fishing with other equipment, which I'll tell you about a little later. But if you are a beginner amateur, then this pocket is for you. It will really bring great results and a big catch while fishing. Friends, if you've never fished with a feeder before, I really recommend you give it a try. I recommend you choose your fishing gear just like we do using the E-Katalog. So, now we're moving on to the E-Katalog. Let's open it up. The tab has a lot of options. Tourism and fishing. Let's open the fishing section and choose a rod, a feeder rod. So, let's look at the popularity right away. And here's a good brand, Salmo. Salmo Blast and Feeder 90 grams. 90 grams is a universal test for a beginner that I would recommend. 771 hryvnia, 907 semdavnic. The prices are quite different. Let's compare this rod with a more, let's say, popular one. Here's the new Salmo Sniper Feeder. Let's say we open the 90 grams option as well and see what we have here. Feeder rod with guides, length 360. Here we can see all the specifications of the rod, including its weight and price. Let's also compare these two rods and see what differences we have here. So, in the catalog you can either view all the parameters or just the ones that differ between the products. Let's just look at the differences. The length when folded and the weight. The weight of the rods is different. Let's take a look at all the parameters now. Plug-in medium fast action, 90 grams, 4 sections, the length is the same. They only differ in weight. I would say these rods, well, in that case, I would recommend you choose a newer rod. This is the Salmo Sniper Feeder with a test weight of 90 grams. That's exactly the kind of test I would recommend for a beginner. Guys, we buy and choose all our fishing gear using the E-Katalog. It's very convenient. You can check the price trends and find any product you want. So if you're interested, the link to the E-Katalog will be in the description below this video. The feeder rig looks like this. We have the main line here to which a sliding feeder is attached with a spring inside and a weight. It can be any shape, any size. I tied it to the feeder itself, you see at the top. A fixed rig, somewhere with a lead of about 5 to 7 centimeters. Make sure, guys, to create that lead right on the feeder itself. Next, everything is standard. I have a very coarse bead, a rough bead like this, a swivel, and a leader about 10 centimeters long. Many anglers believe that you shouldn't use this dropper upper leader, that you won't see a bite on it. Guys, I'm telling you again, it's based on the principle of a bobber rig. All bites will be visible. When a crucian carp bites, it will tug. Because this leader is right next to the feeder, you can easily push the hook in like this, so the crucian carp comes up, and first of all, it focuses all its attention on this very close hook, and that's where it will bite. So I strongly recommend you to make a dropper leader, and you'll have self-hooking bites, powerful bites that you'll be able to see, and that's exactly what they'll bite on. There are many options for feeders, but I still use this one. This is exactly what I've been using all these years. Let's say from my childhood I used to fish with such a rig. It was catching the best, the very best. The rig is cautious with a line of about 0.35. The main thing is that you can make 0.25, 0.2 leads depending on where you are fishing. You shouldn't use thin leaders because they'll get tangled up a lot. The line should still be a bit thicker so that they lay separately like this, but at the same time they are quite thick and coarse. As you can see, the hooks here aren't very big either. For crucian carp they are just perfect and you can catch a lot on them. That means you can take any for Cormac. A telescopic rod, a length of 2.5 to 2 meters, any reel roughly speaking, and line for fishing. There are also many different types of feeders and springs that can be used for feeding. There are feeders like these. They are very tightly packed with food. It is in them. It lasts a long time and hardly spills out. But because of these upper dropper spirals, which are arc-shaped, not very well, the hooks behave well. The side hooks will get tangled quite often, and such a mass of bait, it seems to me, such a volume is not very effective, especially during a recast. It will stay on the inner spring, while the main part will come off. So I would just set this feeder aside. In my opinion, feeders are the best recommendation for yourself. Something like this, a regular spring with or without a weight inside, because the bulk, the feeders will be filled with the mash that you will be packing in here. During reeling in, on the contrary, you need to have no weight so that the feeder comes out of the water as well as possible. Therefore, you can buy such a feeder either with a small load or without any load at all, just the feeder spring itself. Before we move on to the next rig, which is quite right, you could say it's sporty and very effective. I want to go back to the feeders. Friends, the feeder is the rig that I started fishing with. These side hooks, which are right next to the feeder, the one I told you about, there was a lot of discussion about it on my channel, and many anglers said, Serioga, you won't see the bites on them, they're ineffective. I want to tell you that the main mass, the bites happen specifically on the side hook that's attached to the feeder. You can clearly see them on the rod, and these dropper rigs work best because they are right next to the bait, right at the source where the fish feed, and the other dropper rig is a bit further away. So in my opinion, the feeder is one of the most effective homemade rigs as of today. Do it yourself. There are feeders with metal tackle, with metal arms, there are some dropper rigs. Yes, it all works. If you're fishing in some paid ponds where there's a lot of fish, they'll eat just about anything. If you're out fishing for crucian carp at a regular pond, I simply recommend using, as I already told you, the feeder is homemade. In general, the next rig is the flat feeder and flat fishing method. I caught a lot of fish with this rig last year. Crucian carp. A white ammer is hooked, and this rig is quite effective. This rig has just one hook. Roughly speaking, in general, this rig has its roots, historically speaking, in the old days. When there was a bait holder, the Cork I told you about, its effectiveness is the same. But here there's just one hook and a bite. If it happens, you'll definitely see it, this bite. And indeed, the way the bait is presented is very good. That's great, and very right. In the rig, the Cork works well too, but there can be snags. It can get tangled, and it's more about that. It's on self-hooking. Here, self-hooking is possible, but only in a few variations. I'll tell you everything right now. So this rig is very effective and catches fish. Well, as of today, it's very effective. I specifically use flat feeders and the flat method to fish and catch crucian carp. Right, now, this is especially effective when feeder fishing, when you don't use any indicators, bites, or anything like that. You just sit like you're fishing for bream, watching the feeder, and it's a great pleasure to quietly and carefully catch crucian carp, specifically with a flat method feeder. So the flat feeder, here we have the main line, and there's this silicone, let's say, dropper that prevents the feeder from getting tangled. Here you have the right carp line, or whatever you have, braided line, any line, whatever you want. It's on the blood, swivel, and leader. The length of the leader, guys, should be about 7-8 centimeters up to 10. I recommend here, as is correct, either a pop-up or popcorn, as it's called, or a floating boilie, or I even attach regular dung worms, and the maggots bite really well. The point is that with this gear, all the bait is on top, and the bait is mounted directly. This is how it gets pressed down into the bait. I've shown you this more than once. It flies really well, it lands really well, and this feeder always falls with the weight down like this. So it turns out to be a very correct and super effective presentation of your bait. When the fish swims up, the food here becomes slightly soggy, and on top, on this spot of your bait, lies the hook with your bait. It turns out really cool. Right now I have a fixed rig option here. In different feeders there are various shapes, like conical ones. This is the hole, and when your swivel goes in there, it's like a hook. This one, so it gets tightly secured there. And to pull it out, you need to apply quite a bit of force. This will be the fixed rig option, where you won't be able to see it. It takes some effort to get it out of here. This will be the fixed rig option, where you won't be able to see it. This sliding effect disappears. If you attach a bead right here, precisely at this exact location, exactly in this spot, then you all can see what happens. It will be a sliding rig that will keep sliding all the time. And you'll be able to see every bite clearly on your feeder or on your long distance baiting setup. For such flat feeder types, there are a lot of different molds available, meaning the bait is packed in there specifically using a mold. Your hands stay clean and it results in the right shape and the right amount bait. Because if you stuff too much bait into this feeder, during the flight some of it will just fall off. There should be a little mound of bait, just like the feeder itself, just above the plastic bends. Now I'll show you what the difference between a plastic and a silicone mold, and which mold I chose. Flat feeders are practically all the same size, but there is a slight difference. For example, here are two feeders, each weighing 40 grams. This one is slightly smaller. This one is just a little bit bigger. I would still go for the one that's just a little bit bigger, guys. For some reason I like it more, it's just the way it looks. There are silicone molds like these and there are plastic ones. Plastic mold, I don't really like them because the feeders don't sit very well in them. It can vary. It presses the bait poorly. I much prefer the silicone one. So we take some bait, throw it in here, grab the feeder and place it like this. We press it tightly and all the bait stays in the feeder. But I want to tell you that it's not always convenient for me to do this with the molds either. It was even faster for me while fishing in some cases. When your bait is properly moistened, you can just take it like this, stick it onto the feeder a bit, and that's it. It holds on amazingly well. So there's no excess part. You press it down like this with your hand. Your hand rests right on these ribs, and there's a layer left here, exactly the one you need. Well, that's all I wanted to tell you. In my opinion, the most effective tackle for crucian carp, if I were fishing, I would use the flat method. This is the top choice with a single hook. This is a very effective tackle. I really liked it. And the second tackle, of course, is my old trusty rig with a short dropper line attached directly to the feeder. These are the two rigs I would use for fishing. Crucian carp in Dieck, in Platte, in any pond, really. If we're talking about big carp, I would use the flat method without hesitation. But if it's crucian carp, then you can experiment a bit. Either Carmack or flat metal, depending on how you want to catch fish. Today there are a lot of them. I'm telling you about tackle and setups. You can come to the store. There will be both plastic swing tips and metal dropper lines. Ready-made Chinese tackle. Guys, don't do that. The tackle for catching crucian carp came to us from China. It's all forgotten old stuff. The Chinese make it as cheap as possible. Faster, coarser, because a big hook costs less than a small good one made of strong steel. They attach them there, attach cheap threads there. These cambrics, silicones, you look at the gear, it seems like you can throw it away. I don't know, like a bull or something, or just attach a cow there and pull it. No, you don't have to do that. Better yet, mount the gear yourself, make it careful, and then the fish will bite much more effectively. That's 100% proven.